Welcome to Pushing Forward with Alycia, a podcast that gives disability a voice. Each week, we will explore topics like confidence, ambition, resilience, and finding success against all odds. We are creating a collective community that believes that all things are possible for all people. Open hearts, clear paths, let's go. Welcome back to Pushing Forward with Alycia. I am Alycia, and I am honored today to welcome the Honorable Tony Coelho, retired U.S. Congressman from California, Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee Chairman, and you're not going to believe this, people, the principal author of the landmark Americans with Disabilities Act. Yep, I said it. The principal author. Wow. We are making history today. It's incredible. Tony has literally spent his life championing the rights, opportunities, and inclusion of people with disabilities. He calls this work his ministry, and the disabled community knows him as the voice and the champion for so many legislation and opportunity that we enjoyed today. His legacy continues with the Tony Coelho Center of Disability Law, Policy, and Innovation at Loyola Marymount University. And it has been my privilege to bump into him in the elevator at an event that he received an award, the Impact Award at WAWA Ability 2025. You're just a powerful, amazing, influential person in our movement. And I've been doing a lot of homework on just past videos and your advocacy within legislation and law building up to the ADA. And I watched this video in 1988, and it was from the joint House-Senate hearing on discrimination on the basis of disability. And you had this quote that I wrote down that I wanted to start the show with. It is time for our government to recognize our abilities and give us the dignity to do what we can. And that is the heartbeat of the ADA. It's the heartbeat of this movement. Tony, thank you so much for giving me time and space today. It's my honor to meet you. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Alycia. Appreciate it very much being on your program. Look forward to our discussion.
Me too. I have so many questions. You call the disability rights movement your ministry. What do you mean by that? What does it mean to you personally and even on a spiritual level?
When I was 16, I had my first seizure. I was in a dairy barn milking cows for the family. I woke up and I was in the house in the bed, and my brother had carried me from the barn to the house. And my parents were there and a doctor was there, and they checked me out and then they talked. And he told them that he thought that I had epilepsy. I just had a seizure. My parents, being Portuguese and Catholic, culturally felt that if you had epilepsy, it meant that you're possessed by the devil. Now, I always say at this point, Alycia, that my Republican friends know I'm possessed, but to have your family feel that, it's a little different. So what happened is during a period of my life, I grew more and more removed from my family. When my mother died and the body's going into the ground, a voice came over me and said, you got to decide if you love her or respect her. It can't be both. And because of all she put me through, I didn't respect her. She was my mother, and she did a lot of things out of love, not to hurt me, but I did develop scar tissue. But she did it out of love, not out of hate or vindictiveness or anything else. So once I said that, I immediately had a grand mal seizure right there in the cemetery. I tell you that story only for you to understand, and you do, is just how impactful things can happen to you as someone with a disability when people don't really understand who we are, what we can do, and so forth. So my whole passion after I went to college, I decided instead of being a trial lawyer, I wanted to be a Catholic priest. I then go to my medical exam, and the doctor says, have you ever heard the word epilepsy? I said, no. He says, let me give you some good news and bad news. The good news is you're 4F, which militarily means you can't serve in the military. And the bad news is canon law established, amended in 400 AD by the Catholic Church, said that if epilepsy or possessed by the devil, you can't be a priest. So I was rejected, but I left there feeling good because all of a sudden I knew what these passing out spells were. So I knew I wasn't possessed, that it was passing out spells, which meant it was epilepsy. And so I could take medication, wouldn't cure it, but it would help me with a degree of the seizure and so forth. But just knowing what it is important. And so I was excited. I left the doctor's office, called my parents, and said, I have an answer. Doctor says I have epilepsy. Without hesitation, my mother said, son of ours has epilepsy. What I didn't know is that in certain cultures, God punishes a family for some major sin that some family member committed, and that having these seizures is basically telling folks that this family screwed up somewhere. And so I didn't have an appreciation of any of that, but culturally, I could understand as devout Catholics what they were probably going through. Didn't make me feel any better, but now I understand that. But then what happens is that I go back to the fraternity house, and now I've got all kinds of job offers because I was student body president. I start calling, and then I get the applications, you fill it out. On every application in those days, 1964, had the word epilepsy. So I checked it. I never got an interview. I got lots of offers, but I never got an interview. So all of a sudden, I realized that God had turned against me. My church had turned against me. My family had turned against me, and I couldn't get a job. And I'm an A1 personality, and that was devastating to me. So I started drinking, was drunk by 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon on a mountaintop, Griffith Park in Los Angeles. Now, there are no mountains there, there are hills. But if you're drunk, it's a mountain. And the day that I'm going to do the dirty deed and commit suicide, all of a sudden on this bottom of this hill is a merry-go-round. And all of a sudden a voice came over me, and I can hear it today, said, you're going to be just like those little kids getting on and off that merry-go-round. You're never going to let anybody or anything stop you from doing what you want to do. Whoa, I got my mojo back. I've never been depressed since. I drink, but I don't get drunk. All of a sudden, I was ready to go again. In 2 weeks, a priest friend of mine got me an opportunity to live with Bob Hope and his family, and I lived with him for a year. It was a tremendous experience for somebody from a poor family and who'd watched the Bob Hope crisis over everything else. All of a sudden, I'm living with he and his family. He's the one who said, after many talks, he's the one who said, look, you think you have a ministry and it only can be practiced in a church and you're struggling. True ministry is practiced in sports, entertainment, business, government, but you belong in politics. Alycia, I never had thought of that. But all of a sudden, I wrote a letter to my congressman who I didn't know. I got the job. I was a staffer for 13 years. He decided to retire. I ran and took his place. And when I was working for him, I realized I couldn't suggest amendments to help people with disability in housing, transportation, whatever, because we didn't have our civil rights. So when I got elected, then that was the thing I started worrying about, working on, helping with. And I worked with the Reagan administration to begin with, put together legislation. That hearing that you talked about was my legislation before Ted Kennedy's committee. We put that in. And then the next year, we worked with the grassroots and so forth and came up with the other piece of legislation that we then moved through the Congress.
Wow. I'm a little bit, there's so much to unpack there, because I think a lot of us with disabilities, especially growing up in our youth, I know for me too, I come from a Catholic family. There was people in my family that said, wow, you must have done something really bad in your past life.
Right.
Yeah. And I'm connecting with you because I was born in the 70s before ADA. So there's a lot of similarities of just my youth with your youth and the depression, and then having aha moments and claiming it as power instead of the bias. I have chills. That whole story was so incredible. Wow. And then the part that I think is so amazing about you, there's a lot that's so amazing about you, but as I was studying you, what really inspired me was your advocacy during this time when advocating public self-identifying with disabilities during an era that it wasn't accepted, that it was looked at as taboo more than ever, that it was looked at as being possessed. and you still showed up with strength and power to advocate for us. It's beautiful. How was that during that time?
I'm very spiritual. And so I believe when I got my power, that was part of it. And I'm not afraid to talk to anybody. I've talked to every president about disabilities. I can tell you a story about my conversation with the Pope about epilepsy and so forth. And so I'm not afraid to be rejected. But the only way I can force acceptance is to go after it and educate and push and so forth. And eventually you can get there if you're willing to suffer the arrows that come your way. And I've gotten a lot of them over the years, but I don't worry about it. I just feel strongly committed. And it is my ministry. I say all the time that when I was in the Congress and I was the whip, my job was to count the votes, right? I just needed to get 218, but that's a lot to get. My staff would call the chair that was next to my desk the confessional. And the reason they did is that members of Congress would come in and they would tell me personal stories, political stories, whatever, about their life and so on and so forth. And I would help them. Now, I did that with my collar, right? That's the role that I played there. Then I still do my collar a lot because I feel if you can help out a single individual, you're doing God's work. So it's important to help whenever you can. So those folks that I helped, when I needed a vote, I'd go to them and say, hey, Alycia, I need your vote on this bill and so forth. And 9 out of 10 times they would give it to me. So that whole time I was the whip, we never lost an amendment or a vote or a rule on the House floor. And I counted it, my whole group counted them to the nth degree. Some of them we won only by one vote, but we pushed hard to get that. But that is my ministry. I feel strongly like I'm 83. I feel as strong today when I was 25 and started pushing.
Wow.
And I feel it's critically important to make a difference. Now, some people tell me, Tony, you're 83. Why don't you slow down? I don't feel like slowing down. I still think there's a lot to be done, and I keep at it all the time. And that's exciting to me. Now, let me tell you the Pope story real quickly.
Oh, please.
So I am now in the Congress, and I'm whip, so I'm the third highest ranking person in the Congress. And so I get to take a trip and take a group of members with me. So a Codel, they call it. And so we get to go to 3 different countries. The first country I want to go to is Portugal. I'm Portuguese, so it'd be red carpet, state dinner, all that other stuff. But it's my ancestry, and so I wanted to go there. And I hadn't been there before. Second, the State Department got to pick the second country was Morocco, and I'd meet with the king about some issues that he was working on with the Portuguese government in regards to the Middle East. So I did that. There's another story there, which is interesting. But then the third leg was to meet with the Pope. And so we fly into the Vatican. It's a different country. We fly into the Vatican. We're in the room. The door opens. Pope John Paul II walks in. We stand up. He goes to the chair, sits down. Everybody sits down, and I go to the podium. My whole view is that whenever you have a captive audience, it's a podium. So it can be nothing at all. It can be steel. It can be wood. It can be whatever. But if you have control of an audience, that's your podium. And so I got up and I read the very boring pre-approved speech by the State Department, my office in the Vatican. I read it. And when I got through, I said, Your Holiness, I can't live with myself if I didn't tell you something personal. And his minions around the room, you could hear them because it's a violation. You're not supposed to do that. My delegation looked at me as I was crazy. So I said, as a young man, I decided I wanted to become a Catholic priest. However, when it was determined that I had epilepsy, Canada law, established in 400 AD, said that if the epilepsy are possessed by the devil, you can't be a priest. I think that is very unchristian of our church, and I wish you'd look into it. And I sat down. He then gives the very boring pre-approved speech from his side. Then we do a lot of photographs and so on. We got lots of them. And then he gets ready to leave. He takes my wife's hand and walks her to the door. I'm walking with him, gets to the door. He turns to her and blesses her. He turns to me and does not bless me. And as a Catholic, if a Pope doesn't bless you, you got trouble. And so he doesn't bless me. Then he says to me, he said, young man, I heard your comments, and turned around and walked away. I never talked about this before because I was embarrassed he didn't bless me. 2 years later, I find out that canon law was changed to permit people with epilepsy to become priests, men, I should say, to become priests. Now, I'm very clear. I don't know if it was my comments to the Pope that did it. All I know is I did make the comments to the Pope. And I think that's what's important, is that you're willing to speak up about something you feel strongly about and not worry about who it is. And that, I think, symbolizes for you and for your listeners about the commitment. You've got to be committed. You can't let a pope or a president or so forth stop you from pushing to get something done.
Wow. That is an incredible story. And I absolutely believe that you had a heavy hand in that. And that just shows how change can be made. That's incredible. And the social capital, the equity, the trust that you're building among the people around you in these stories, your relationship building is incredible too. I'm absolutely blown away. I am. I'm literally blown away. This is incredible. Can we talk about the ADA for a minute? We just celebrated the 35th anniversary of the ADA. Congratulations. Can we talk about the beginning of the crafting of that, your inspiration, your vision, and just the path? Can you just give us a little look back on that, what your journey was like?
Sure. I met with President Reagan's Disability Council, the chair and the vice chair, both women. The vice chair, I was very close to her father, and both of them had a child with a disability. And so they were very concerned about developing something. And I teamed up with them to go ahead and develop some legislation that staff prepared, which you would think. Staff prepared, and we then put it in, and Senator Weicker from Connecticut was the Republican, and I believe that it should be the House and Senate Democrat Republican, so that it's bipartisan, bicameral, and so forth. And so we put it in. The interesting thing that happened is that you send out a dear colleague letter and saying, I'm introducing X and I appreciate your support, blah, blah, blah. We called it robo letter in those days, but it's just a form letter that goes out to everybody. And you get some responses. I'd go on the House floor and I'd have people come up to me and say, Tony, I read your letter. I want to co-sponsor your bill with you. I don't like the way my wife, my father, my mother, my brother, my next door neighbor is treated because of their disability. And I want to work with you to do something about it. Now, they never read the letter really that much. They didn't know anything about the bill. All they knew is that we in the disability community were being mistreated, that we didn't get the rights everybody else had. And they want to be part of it. So when I introduced that first bill, we had something like 150 different people. And Democrats, Republicans, liberal, conservatives didn't make any difference. Everybody was concerned. We then finished that Congress. Then you have to reintroduce it in the next Congress. And in that time, then I found out that there was this whole grassroots effort. And I had that testimony that you were talking about at the end of the first Congress. But then I found out that this grassroots effort was taking place. Justin Dart, a Republican and a chair from Texas, wonderful human being. And he had been going around the country and developing support. And so from January, instead of putting in a bill, I put it in October. So from October through June, we worked on legislation. We didn't put it back in January when the new Congress started. We tried to work together and so forth. Worked with the White House. It was President George H.W. Bush. And he had a daughter with a disability who died at a young age. So he and Barbara were very committed to what I was working on. And then in the Senate, you had Bob Dole, wounded veteran with a disability. You had Ted Kennedy, probably the most dominant Democrat in the Congress. He had a son and a sister and so forth, all with disabilities. You had Tom Harkin, who had a brother who was hearing impaired. And then you had Orrin Hatch, a very conservative Republican from Utah who was a Mormon. And at that hearing that you saw, Ted turned to him and said, "Why don't you go ahead and question Tony?" And his comments to me, he said, "Congressman, I just want you to know that in my church, we consider you a child of God. I will do anything you want to help you get this through." And he did. He's a conservative Republican. He was part of the whole effort and so on. And so then we put it in and we got it through quickly. It was unusual, the most significant civil rights bill in the last 40 years. But we got it through. It was tough to get it through the House. There was opposition. Greyhound Bus was the most aggressive one, saying they can't put people on in their bus that are in wheelchairs or whatever. And my position with him, I said, look, when this becomes law, you're going to get people developing a technology where your bus can dance and swing and sway and everything. And so now the buses bow down to pick up somebody in a wheelchair. But we gave them, I can't remember, Alycia, for sure, but it was like 15 years or something like that to develop the technology that they did not have to comply with the ADA for that period of time while the technology was developed. So we got it through the House and the Senate after a lot of work. And Steny Hoyer of Maryland deserves credit to get it through the House. And on the Senate side, you had those four individuals I talked about. The combination there is tremendous. So we got it through there. Tom Harkin played a big role in ushering that through the Senate. And then, of course, the president signs it on the south lawn of the White House. And thousands of people with disabilities showed up on the lawn. It was hot, but we didn't care. We had people passing out and we'd give them water and so forth, but we didn't care. This was the most significant thing to happen to our community. So that was it. It was tough. It wasn't easy, but the emotional impact of the potential of it was so great, people couldn't stop us. And go back what you said earlier, I really was aggressive and self-identified. I felt very strongly that you had to get out there and say you had a disability. So basically, I take the view that you need to be proud of who you are. And I always say to people with a disability, first off, you got to love yourself. You got to look in a full-length mirror and said, I love you. Now, if there's something about you that you don't like the color of your hair, change it. If you don't like the color of your eyes, get contacts. You can change it. If you don't like how fat you are or how skinny you are, you can work on that. If you don't like how tall you are or how short you are, not much you can do there. But the point is, get to a point where you can say, I love you. And if you can do that, you're powerful.
Yeah.
Because you then know that you're right and you can push to make a difference. One time in the epilepsy community, somebody had a great, brilliant idea on the epilepsy board that epilepsy is a negative word. We should change our name instead of the National Epilepsy Foundation. We should change it to the National Seizure Foundation. I said, no way. I said, you're caving into the negatives when you change the word of who you are. You keep pushing for the word who you are. That's the way we break through. We don't break through by giving in to prejudice. And so let's stop that. But that's my attitude about things. Take what you have and make something out of it. And if you're committed and willing to take the arrows, you can make a difference. One of my quotes that I love to give all the time, I know you asked for them at the end, but I'm going to tell you now,
Okay.
is that I believe this strongly. Give me the opportunity to fail. And if you do that, then I may be able to succeed. And the reason is so many people won't even give us that opportunity to fail.
Yeah.
Well, how do you know if I can do the job? You think because the way I look or whatever, I can't do it? Give me an opportunity to fail, just like you would anybody else. I don't believe that we have a right not to be fired. I believe we have an obligation to be fired if we can't do the job. And that's the message that I give to business all the time. I want you to give us a chance to succeed, but fire us if we don't. I have no reservations about that.
Amazing. And I totally agree with you. And that word epilepsy is like the same word with just disability and how people are constantly trying to reframe it. And I'm in the same mindset. Why? Can we just commit this is who we are and be proud of it and shift the narrative behind this word. So I love that's part of your advocacy too. And what a beautiful story of coming together in our politics, in leadership from all different backgrounds. And everybody came together with personal stories of disability, which that is the thing of disability. It's our common ground, not the thing that separates us, even though our general society puts it in this other category when it really is not.
We talked about our disability. I like to say we talked about who we are. It's not a negative. We talk about who we are. Look at, I've had seizures for 65 years. Still have them. I have a seizure. That's okay. I'm much better off than a lot of other people with disabilities, but I have a seizure. I don't mind telling people I have a seizure. I don't mind admitting I have a seizure because you know what? There are a lot of things I do better than other people. There's some things I can't do. I can't drive an ambulance. I can't drive a police car. Can't carry a gun. I know all that stuff. I don't care. But there's some things that I can do much better than other people, able-bodied people. The other thing I would say when I talk about the ADA, and I'm so excited about talking about it, as you can tell, but the other thing that I do when I talk about the ADA, I said, look, you're able-bodied, right? I just want you to know that the ADA is there for you because at some point in your life, you're going to have a disability. And this is a life insurance policy for you to have.
It's beautiful. And it's so true. And I say that all the time on the many stages that I'm on too, because I think that it's just what part of our civil rights and history that so many people still don't know. But I think that piece of our history isn't taught enough, isn't discussed enough, isn't known enough in our country as one of the most significant pieces of civil rights that's ever literally been passed in our country. It's so important and it's incredible the work that you've done. And you talk about bipartisanship, you talk about all of this being our common ground. How do we do better today? How do we do better? How do we advance this? Where do we need to go? What are we doing good? How do we bring lawmakers and politicians together in this movement today?
I think it's important for those of us with disabilities to recognize that other communities have been through their struggles. People of color got their rights in the 60s. Women got their rights in the 70s. The gay got their rights in the 90s. But you look at all the communities that became part of this trial of ours called America. It's exciting to be included in that family of America. So instead of worrying about the discrimination I went through, I'm just excited about what I can do now. And what more I can do as I keep moving along. I'm chairman of a bank in New York. I'm on several corporate boards. I do a lot of speaking and so forth. I have my own family business. It's exciting, but I have seizures. Doesn't stop me.
Beautiful. What is your greatest hope for the future and the next chapter in the disability rights movement in our country?
There are two things. I'm very concerned about the Civil Rights Act being negated in some way by the Supreme Court or politically. The ADA would be impacted and I think would be set back for years. So it's my biggest concern today that the political atmosphere is there to make some changes. I think it's wrong, and I don't think that people in total are in support of pulling back on civil rights and pulling back on the ADA. But it's something that bothers me. It really troubles me, and I'm very concerned about it. In regards to what is more important for us, that's important, obviously. But what is important to us is jobs, more and more jobs. The ADA does not require a job. The ADA says you can't discriminate from employing somebody with a disability. But we don't say you have to hire somebody or there's a number that you have to have or whatever. But I got through with President Obama an amendment to the Federal Contractors and Subcontractors Act that says that women, people of color, and the disabled have to be hired by these federal contractors. There was never a definition for disability. There was no numbers as where we lived or anything else. So I got all that done with a lot of people. I got all that done. and then went to Obama and convinced him to issue the rule. 434,000 people with disabilities were hired. And what it means is that if you were pushing pencils or water or airplanes or whatever to the federal government, that's massive, as you can see, what the federal government purchases. You then had to comply with the law. And as long as we have enforcement, now I'm going to just dwell on that a minute. Whoever you support for president, make sure that you know that they're going to appoint an attorney general who then is going to appoint somebody head of the Civil Rights Division who will enforce the law in regards to civil rights, which means enforce the ADA. If it's not enforced, it's just a piece of paper. That's one of my concerns, why I'm so aggressive out there all the time, is to say that, look, we have to make sure that the ADA is enforced. It's the law, but if it's not enforced, it makes no difference. That's one of my biggest concerns as we move along, is not to have 35 years go to waste. I just feel strongly that there are generations that were born in the last 35 years that don't know what it was like before 35 years. And I don't want them to have to experience it. I want them to experience the progress that we've made.
Me too. Thank you. I agree. And I think all of us as a disabled community right now, many of us are very fearful of that too. And many of us, like you're saying, don't know a day without the ADA. I remember those days. I want to thank you personally for the freedoms that you have given, not only our country, but really the legislation that you created and the work that you've done has been a guidepost for the world to follow. And what an incredible gift to our world, all the work that you've done in your ministry, your beautiful ministry of creating change and opportunity and equality and all of those things for our community.
Let me just say one thing. The exciting thing about the ADA is that over 50 different countries have adopted their own ADA. So that means ADA now has impacted the world community, and people throughout the world recognize that those of us with disabilities have tremendous ability. And so that's a wonderful export that we have made.
A wonderful export, and what a amazing and impactful life you've gifted our world. It's so beautiful. I'm going to ask you a pushing forward moment to just see if you have one more. I know you already said it, but maybe there's a little gift you can give away once more to leave our community with your power and inspiration as they leave this episode today.
I would say to all of us in the disability community, not to be afraid to speak up to power. That is the only way we can make a difference. And all they can do is say no, but just think they might say yes. And that's what's important.
Yes, I love it. Tony, it has been my pleasure. I will never forget meeting you as long as I live. Thank you so much for gracing this show with your amazing presence and for all the work that you've done in our world. You're an absolutely incredible man, and I am so honored to know you now. And just thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you, Alycia. Love you. Appreciate all you do.
I love you too. And this has been, let me wrap up real quick. This has been Pushing Forward with Alycia, and that is literally how Tony and I roll. We will see you next time.